It is one of the most unsettling truths about the world. The people we imagine should rise to positions of power. The wise, the compassionate, the fair often remain on the sidelines, while those who are self serving, deceitful, or even reckless somehow end up in command. History is littered with such examples. A smooth talking opportunist manipulates their way into the throne, while a principled, capable rival fades into obscurity. A reckless executive gets promoted for visionary boldness, while the quiet, competent team leader is passed over again. The paradox is so glaring that it almost feels like a cruel joke in a world desperate for genuine leadership. Why do the worst people so often get the job? This question has haunted thinkers for centuries. Niccolò Machiavelli, writing in the early 16th century, observed that a ruler who wished to survive in the turbulent politics of his time could not afford to be bound entirely by morality. To keep power, he argued, one must sometimes act against honesty, against kindness, even against compassion. He was not telling people to be evil, but he was brutally honest about the fact that power often rewards those who play a different game than the rest of us. Modern psychology has confirmed parts of this disturbing insight. Traits like narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, the so called dark triad, can, in certain environments, look a lot like the charisma, boldness, and confidence we think leaders should have. The result, the person who rises to the top is not necessarily the most capable, but the one most willing to exploit appearances. In this video, we will explore 6 core insights drawn from philosophy, history, and psychology that will help you understand why leadership often rewards the wrong people. But more importantly, we'll also explore what you, as a thoughtful person, can do about it, how to see through the illusions, protect yourself from manipulation, and influence your own sphere without losing your integrity. Because if Machiavelli was right, and much of the evidence suggests he was, then the only way to stop the wrong people from ruling the world is for the right people to learn how the game is truly played. Imagine you are at a company meeting. 2 people are presenting competing ideas. The first speaker is calm, careful, and well prepared. Their slides are clear, their reasoning sound. They pause before answering questions, making sure to consider each one fully. The second speaker strides in with a commanding presence. Their slides are flashy, their voice confident, their jokes perfectly timed. They answer questions instantly, not always accurately, but with a certainty that makes the audience nod along. After the meeting, the vote is taken. The second speaker's plan wins. This moment, repeated in offices, politics, and public life every day, is what Niccolò Machiavelli would have called the triumph of appearance over reality. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns that a ruler must seem to be all mercy, all faith, all honesty, all humanity, all religion, but crucially, only seem. The world rewards those who can project competence, even if it's hollow. Modern psychology has confirmed this bias. In experiments, people routinely judge confident individuals as more competent than hesitant ones, even when both have the same skill level. This is known as the confidence heuristic. Our brains take confidence as a shortcut for competence because in ancient environments, quick judgments often meant survival. The loud hunter might not have been better at tracking prey, but he seemed sure of himself, and that was reassuring to the tribe. In leadership contexts, this bias becomes dangerous. Narcissists, for example, are often masters of self presentation. They speak as if they are destined to lead, radiating certainty. They may lack the depth of skill or the moral grounding that true leadership requires, but the illusion of competence is often enough to get them in the door. Once there, they can leverage visibility, alliances, and perception to stay in power. We also fall into what psychologists call the halo effect. Once we perceive someone as good in one area, confident, attractive, well spoken, we unconsciously assume they are good in other areas too, like intelligence or trustworthiness. This is why the flashy presentation can eclipse the careful analysis. The feeling of competence overwhelms the reality. The danger, of course, is that this illusion doesn't just fool individuals, it can mislead entire organizations and nations. Think of leaders who have risen on the strength of stirring speeches and commanding postures, only to lead their countries into disaster. Think of executives who secure promotions through networking bravado rather than measurable results, only to mismanage entire divisions. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He argued that a wise ruler should master the performance of leadership, not because morality didn't matter, but because the crowd rarely peers behind the curtain to see what's real. The tragic twist is that those with genuine competence often refuse to play this game, believing that merit should speak for itself. But in a world wired for appearances, silence can be mistaken for weakness. So here is the first hard truth. In human affairs, perception is often more decisive than reality. This does not mean we must all become actors, deceiving and manipulating, but it does mean that to protect ourselves and to ensure good leadership rises, we must learn to recognize the difference between looking competent and being competent. And it raises a deeper, unsettling question. If reality isn't enough to win power, how far should a good person go to look the part? In the year 1502, Caesar Borgia, the ruthless son of Pope Alexander VI, invited a group of rebellious mercenary captains to a lavish banquet in the Italian city of Senigallia. These men had betrayed him before, switching allegiances to his enemies, but Caesar smiled, embraced them warmly, and promised a new alliance. After the feast, he had them quietly arrested and executed. This cold-blooded act horrified many, but it impressed one man, Niccolò Machiavelli, who was then a young diplomat observing Borgia's court. To Machiavelli, this was a masterclass in what he would later write in The Prince, that a ruler must learn to be both the fox and the lion, the fox to recognize traps, the lion to frighten wolves. Deception, in his eyes, was not a moral failure, but a political necessity. It's easy to recoil at this. In ordinary life, lying is corrosive, but in the brutal arena of power, Machiavelli saw that truth was often a luxury, and that leaders who were too honest in hostile environments risked being outmaneuvered by those who lied with precision. Modern psychology has studied this exact phenomenon. Research shows that in competitive settings, those who use selective deception, not constant lying, but well timed targeted falsehoods, can gain a strategic advantage. This is because information is power, controlling what others know, and when they know it, shapes decisions in your favor. Think of corporate negotiations. A CEO might overstate the strength of their company's finances to deter acquisition attempts. A politician might publicly deny a future policy change to avoid early backlash, only to introduce it later when opposition has quieted. Whether we like it or not, such tactics can work because they play on human predictability and the limits of our attention. Sun Tzu, writing nearly 2,000 years before Machiavelli, put it bluntly: all warfare is deception. Leaders who understand this and who are willing to act on it can manipulate events before anyone realizes what's happened. The disturbing truth is that those who refuse to engage in such tactics may be blindsided by them. Divorce, deception has a cost. Lies can unravel, credibility can be lost, but those skilled in strategic deception know how to balance the risk. They avoid needless falsehoods that would make them appear dishonest in general, instead saving their untruths for moments that secure an outsized gain. They cloak their actions in partial truths, half promises, and ambiguous statements that allow for plausible deniability. The ethical tension here is sharp. On one side, there's the ideal of transparent honesty. On the other, the reality that full transparency can be exploited by those who are less scrupulous. This is what Machiavelli understood, that a ruler who is always good will be ruined among those who are not. In modern leadership, we see this play out in subtler ways. The deceptive leader rarely tells a bald-faced lie. More often, they withhold key details, frame data selectively, or use optimistic projections as a weapon to shape expectations. And because their deception is wrapped in charm, confidence, and authority, many never question it until the truth no longer matters. For those of us who want to live ethically, the lesson is not that we should become serial liars. It is, instead, that we must become better at detecting strategic deception and understanding how it shifts the balance of power. Otherwise, we risk playing chess without realizing the other player is hiding pieces in their pocket. And so we arrive at our next uncomfortable reality. Some people win not because they are right, but because they are willing to bend truth into a tool. The question, then, is what kind of personality thrives in such an environment, and why the rest of us are so often drawn to them. Picture the first few weeks of a new leader taking charge. They walk into the room as if it belongs to them, every inch of space claimed by posture, tone, and eye contact. They speak in bold visions rather than cautious plans. They are quick to highlight their own past victories, and when something goes wrong, they smoothly redirect blame. At first, you might think surely people will see through this, but instead, they gain followers. They attract attention. Their confidence is magnetic. This is the paradox of narcissism in leadership. The very traits that make narcissists toxic in personal relationships, arrogance, self absorption, a hunger for admiration, can give them an edge in competitive environments. Psychologists describe narcissism as part of the dark triad of personality traits, along with Machiavellianism and psychopathy. Narcissists believe in their own superiority, and crucially, they act as if it's already been confirmed by the world. This unwavering self belief radiates certainty, which many interpret as competence and vision. In survival terms, this makes sense. In uncertain situations, humans instinctively look for signals of confidence. If you're in a storm at sea, you want a captain who appears sure of the course, even if their certainty is unfounded. This is the certainty bias at work. Our brains prefer decisive wrongness to hesitant correctness because in times of threat, hesitation feels dangerous. Narcissists are also skilled self-promoters. They know how to broadcast successes, bury failures, and craft a personal narrative in which they are the hero. Over time, these narratives become self-reinforcing, The more others treat them as leaders, the more they believe they are destined to lead, and the more their followers believe it too. There's also the matter of risk tolerance. Narcissists tend to take bigger risks, often because they overestimate their own abilities and underestimate potential losses. In systems that reward visible wins, such as politics, corporate competition, or entertainment, risk takers can look like visionaries when gambles pay off, even if the failures are quietly swept aside. But there's a darker side. Narcissistic leaders can become dangerously insulated from feedback because they surround themselves with admirers and silence dissenters. They lose the corrective input that keeps most leaders grounded. Over time, their inflated self image can lead to reckless decisions, decisions that others must pay for. Machiavelli would not have been surprised by this dynamic. In The Prince, he observed that people judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, meaning they respond more to appearances than to actual outcomes. A narcissist's constant display of self assurance is to the public eye often more convincing than the quieter competence of a humble leader. The tragedy is that humility, a quality essential for learning and adapting, is often mistaken for weakness. In contrast, narcissists' lack of humility reads as strength, at least in the short term. This misperception creates an environment where those with genuine skill but modest self presentation are overlooked, while those with grandiose self promotion ascend. So, what can we do in the face of this? First, we must learn to separate confidence from competence, to evaluate leaders not just by how certain they appear, but by the track record, decision making, and integrity behind their confidence. Second, we must recognize the signs of narcissism early: the excessive self focus, the dismissal of others' contributions, the relentless hunger for admiration. Because the truth is sobering. If charisma and confidence are left unchecked as the primary currencies of leadership, narcissists will continue to dominate the upper ranks. And unless we understand why they succeed, we will remain vulnerable to their charm and blind to their costs. Which leads us to an even more uncomfortable question. If good people are often overlooked, is it because they are too moral for the game or too unwilling to play it? In Plato's Republic, there is a haunting image known as the ship of state. Imagine a great ship whose captain is strong but half blind and hard of hearing. The crew, a group of quarrelsome sailors, fight constantly over who should steer, each insisting they know the way. Meanwhile, the true navigator, the only one who actually understands the stars and the winds, is dismissed as useless because he refuses to flatter the captain or fight dirty for control of the wheel. This is the morality trap. When good people, guided by principle, refuse to adopt the tactics necessary to win in a corrupt system and are therefore excluded from power entirely. History offers countless examples. Idealists enter politics with the intention to serve the public, but balk at backroom deals or manipulative campaigning. They are outmaneuvered by opponents who have no such reservations. In the corporate world, ethical managers refuse to exaggerate quarterly projections to impress shareholders, while their more flexible counterparts are rewarded for doing so. Immanuel Kant, the great moral philosopher, would tell us that this is the price of holding to the moral law, that one must act only on principles you could will to be universal. For Kant, lying was always wrong, even to protect yourself, because it eroded the foundation of trust upon which society depends. This is noble, but in practice, when surrounded by competitors who do not share your moral compass, it can leave you defenseless. Machiavelli, by contrast, saw such rigidity as a dangerous luxury. A prince, he argued, must learn how not to be good when the situation demands it. He did not advocate cruelty for its own sake, but he insisted that survival in a treacherous world requires the flexibility to adapt, even if that means compromising certain virtues. The morality trap is not just about losing power, it's about creating a vacuum that gets filled by those least qualified to wield it responsibly. When good people refuse to play the game, bad actors play it alone. The result is that the very systems we wish to see improved are left in the hands of those least inclined to improve them. Psychologically, part of the problem lies in moral self sabotage. Ethical individuals often believe that using manipulative tactics, even for a good cause, makes them just as bad as their opponents. This black and white thinking ignores the possibility of ethical pragmatism, the art of choosing tactics that are effective without abandoning core values. Aristotle might offer a way forward here. In his concept of phronses, or practical wisdom, Aristotle argued that virtue is not about rigidly following rules, but about discerning the right action for the right situation, guided by both moral purpose and practical reality. This means that sometimes protecting the good may require adopting strategies that are uncomfortable, not because we are abandoning our values, but because we are protecting them in the only way the world will allow. The real danger of the morality trap is that it is invisible to those caught in it. From the inside, it feels like integrity. From the outside, it looks like surrender. So the question becomes, can a good leader remain good while also being shrewd? Can they play the game without losing themselves in it? Because if the answer is no, then history will keep repeating the same pattern, where those most committed to justice are locked out of power, and those least worthy of it reign unchecked. In 1895, the French social psychologist Gustave Le Bon published The Crowd, a study of the popular mind. His thesis was unsettling. When individuals gather in large groups, they do not simply add their intelligence together, they often surrender it. A crowd, he argued, is more emotional, more impulsive, and more suggestible than any single person within it. We like to think that bad leaders rise because they are clever manipulators. That's part of it, but the other part is harder to face. They rise because people let them, and not just let them, but sometimes cheer for them. Consider the phenomenon of identity fusion, when people tie their sense of self so closely to a group or leader that criticism of the leader feels like a personal attack. Once fused, followers defend the leader even against overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, because admitting the truth would mean admitting they themselves were wrong, and our egos resist that at all costs. Le Bon observed that in crowds, individuals become highly susceptible to suggestion. A confident leader can plant an idea, repeat it with conviction, and watch as it spreads not because it is true, but because it feels emotionally satisfying. Modern studies confirm this. People are more likely to believe repeated statements, even if false, a phenomenon known as the illusory truth effect. There's also the psychological pull of in group loyalty. Once a leader is seen as ours, criticism from outsiders often has the opposite of its intended effect, driving the group to rally around the leader more fiercely. This is why scandals that would ruin one leader may actually strengthen another if their followers perceive the scandal as an attack from a hostile other. Machiavelli understood this dynamic well. Story of Youth in The Prince, he advised rulers to cultivate the love of the people, or at least their dependence, because once a leader becomes the symbolic embodiment of a group's identity, they are shielded from many forms of accountability. Even destructive leaders can survive and thrive so long as they keep their base emotionally invested. We also have to face another uncomfortable reality. Many followers do not want a leader who tells them the hard truth. They want a leader who reassures them, who simplifies complexity into certainty, who promises that the group's problems are the fault of outsiders. This is not new. It is as old as human civilization. But in the age of mass media and social algorithms, the effect is amplified. The crowd's complicity does not come from pure ignorance. Often it comes from the small daily trade offs of comfort over truth. We prefer the leader who tells us we are already good enough over the one who demands we grow. We prefer the leader who tells us we have been wronged over the one who asks us to look inward. And over time, these preferences accumulate into a collective choice, a choice that opens the door for the narcissist, the manipulator, the fool. This is why change cannot come only from better leaders appearing. It must also come from better followership, from individuals who are willing to resist the pull of the crowd, to think slowly when others rush, to value truth even when it stings. Without this, the cycle continues, because there will always be someone willing to exploit the desires of the many. Which brings us to our final, and perhaps most hopeful, question. If the game is tilted toward the ruthless, what can principled people do to win without becoming ruthless themselves? If the game of power often rewards the ruthless, the manipulative, and the self absorbed, does that mean principled people are doomed to lose? Not necessarily, but it does mean they have to stop playing only half the game. The core mistake many good leaders make is assuming that moral virtue alone will secure influence. Aristotle's concept of phronsis, practical wisdom, reminds us that morality without strategy is like an architect with no understanding of materials. The design may be beautiful, but the building will collapse in a storm. The counter strategy of the principle begins with accepting a hard truth. You must understand the methods of manipulation in order to defend against them, and sometimes to neutralize them. This is not the same as embracing corruption. It is the art of ethical pragmatism. One, master the optics without losing the substance. If Machiavelli was right that perception shapes reality, then good leaders must learn the craft of perception. This means speaking with confidence, controlling the setting of important conversations, and presenting achievements in a way that resonates emotionally, not just factually. It does not mean lying, but it does mean recognizing that truth needs the right stage to be heard. 2. Selective transparency. Full openness can make you vulnerable to those who will twist your words or exploit your weaknesses. Instead, share information strategically, enough to build trust and rally support, but not so much that opponents can weaponize it. Think of it as choosing when to play your cards face up and when to keep them close. 3. Build coalitions early. Ruthless leaders often rise because they form alliances before anyone sees them as a threat. Principled leaders need to do the same, finding allies who share their core values, but also understand the necessity of collective strength. Influence is rarely a solo sport. Learn the language of power. In every environment, there are unspoken rules, the words that inspire confidence, the narratives that resonate, the rituals that signal authority. Too many good leaders ignore these as surface games, only to find themselves ignored. Learning this language is not selling out, it is ensuring you can be heard. 5. Anticipate the tactics of the ruthless. Just as a chess master studies an opponent's style, principled leaders must learn to spot manipulative patterns early. Flattery, followed by a request, false urgency to force bad decisions, scapegoating to divert blame. Forewarned is forearmed. 6. Anchor yourself in a core principle. Power can seduce even the well intentioned. To avoid losing yourself, identify one non negotiable value, the line you will not cross, and return to it before making major decisions. For some, this might be truth. For others, justice. For others, still, the commitment to leave things better than they found them. Machiavelli himself might have respected this approach. He did not despise virtue, he simply believed it must be accompanied by cunning. In our time, cunning without virtue is a recipe for tyranny, but virtue without cunning is a recipe for irrelevance. The philosopher Reinhold Niebuhr put it succinctly: man's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. In other words, the struggle between principle and power is permanent, and to win, the principled must be as skilled at the mechanics of influence as the unprincipled. If you can master this balance, if you can be both unshakably ethical and strategically effective, you become something rare, a leader who cannot be easily manipulated, outmaneuvered, or corrupted. And that is exactly the kind of leader the world quietly hungers for, even if it doesn't always know how to choose them. Which brings us to the end of our journey and back to the central question. Knowing all of this, what role will you play? Power, like a great river, is never still. It flows toward those who know how to bend it to their advantage, for better or for worse. And in our journey together, we've seen how this current so often favors the narcissist, the liar, and the fool, not because these traits are noble, but because they exploit a fundamental flaw in human systems. That charisma can masquerade as competence, deception can outpace truth, and loud confidence can drown out quiet wisdom. We began with Machiavelli, that sharp eyed realist who dared to strip politics of its moral clothing. He told us plainly: power does not belong to the virtuous, but to the shrewd. And as unsettling as this is, it gave us the courage to examine our own time without illusions. From him, we learned that leadership rewards not necessarily the best of us, but often those most skilled at appearing so. Then we moved deeper. We explored how perception trumps reality in the public eye, that most people follow the image of strength, not the reality of it. We saw how manipulation thrives in human weakness, our longing for certainty, for leaders who promise easy answers. We examined how systems protect those in power, creating a fortress around even the most unworthy rulers. We faced the truth that morality is often optional in politics, that ethical leadership is the exception, not the rule. We saw how the myth of meritocracy hides the uncomfortable truth that connections, deception, and spectacle often outweigh hard work and skill. And finally, we understood that silence is complicity, that without moral courage, the dishonest flourish unchecked. Each of these insights is a shard of a larger mirror, one that reflects not just them out there, but us, because the uncomfortable truth is this: narcissists, liars, and fools rise not simply because of their cunning, but because of the stage we allow them to play upon. We reward them with our attention, our belief, our votes, our silence. But this isn't set where the story has to end. What if leadership were not simply a prize for the boldest self promoter, but a trust given to the wisest? What if we demanded more than charisma? If we insisted on character? What if we measured leaders not by how loudly they speak, but by how well they listen? Not by how much they promise, but by how much they keep? Machiavelli showed us the game as it is, but we, you and I, must decide whether to keep playing by those rules or to write our own. And here's the quiet truth, the cunning hope you never realize. Every time you speak truth where others are silent, every time you choose principle over convenience, every time you refuse to reward the performance of leadership without the substance, you change the game. The world has enough narcissists, liars, and fools. It does not have enough people willing to be the antidote. And if you've stayed with me this far, perhaps you are one of them. So I leave you with this challenge. In whatever sphere you inhabit, your workplace, your community, your family, ask yourself, am I rewarding what is real or what merely appears to be? Then act accordingly. It will be slower, it will be harder, but the ripples you create will outlast the noise of the pretenders. If this conversation has stirred something in you, I invite you to join me here each week as we explore questions that demand more than easy answers. Subscribe, share your reflections below, and let's keep asking not just why the wrong people rise, but how the right ones can endure. The current is strong, but together we can learn to swim against it.